Recording begins. Interior. A different room than usual. Harder acoustics, slightly hollow. The sound of a box being set on a table. Paper rustling. The objective tonight is to determine why that coordinate was restricted. Not what's there, not how to reach it, why the area around it was sealed off, drawn into a military exclusion zone on a chart that has since been quietly removed from official circulation. If the restriction was administrative, a training area, a cable route, an ordnance disposal perimeter, then it tells us something about who knew the location existed and when. If the restriction was something else, it tells us something different. Hannah identified the source 4 days ago. A maritime survey report produced by a civilian survey vessel contracted by the Admiralty in the late 1960s. The report exists in a physical archive at a records repository 2 hours from here, a municipal building that houses decommissioned government documents transferred from various ministries between 1980 and 2005. Hannah called ahead. She confirmed the document existed under a reference number she'd found in the exclusion zone margin notation on the nautical chart. She went yesterday alone with a camera and a notebook and the kind of institutional patience that gets results in places like that. She photographed what she could before the repository closed at 4. She sent me the photographs this morning, and I printed them at a copy shop on the way here because I wanted paper in my hands rather than a screen. Paper is what the investigation runs on. I don't trust myself to notice things on a screen the same way I notice them on a physical surface. The prints are on the table in front of me. 17 pages, photographed at slight angles because Hannah was working fast, some of them cut off at the edges where she couldn't get the camera flat enough in the time she had. The report itself is labeled Survey Vessel Persistence, Northern Channel Sector, Preliminary Findings, 1967. Stamped in red across the front page, Decommissioned. Below that, in a different ink and a different hand, for retention. Someone marked it decommissioned, and someone else, at a different time, made sure it was kept anyway. Hannah is not here tonight. She's following a second thread I'll explain when I understand it better. I'm working through the photographs alone, which I prefer for a first pass. I want my initial reading on the record before Hannah's interpretations influence it. I'm going to work through the report in the order Hannah photographed it, which may not be the order the pages were originally arranged. Some of the section headers are cut off at the top where the camera angle was too shallow. I'll note when I'm uncertain about context. The first readable page is an equipment list. Survey vessel, persistence, displacement approximately 800 tons, out of a port on the south coast, whose name is partially obscured in Hannah's photograph by her thumb. Fitted with an experimental low-frequency sonar array described in a footnote as operating at frequencies below standard commercial survey range. The footnote references a technical specification document, numbered DS41F, that is not included in the photographed pages. Either it was filed separately or Hannah couldn't locate it in the time available. I've written down the specification number in case it's traceable through another route. The second page is a route log, a series of grid coordinates and dates tracking the vessel's survey path through the Northern Channel Sector over a period of 11 weeks in the summer of 1967. The path is methodical, parallel transects running east to west across the survey area, spaced approximately 2 kilometers apart. Standard methodology for seabed mapping. Each transect is numbered sequentially. The vessel moved north through the survey area, completing each east-west pass before repositioning for the next one. 11 weeks for what looks on the page like a relatively compact area, which suggests the low-frequency sonar array worked slowly, or the survey required multiple passes per transect, or both. The log is clean through the first 5 transects. The handwriting is consistent, the entries are brief, the anomaly column is empty. On the 6th transect, the log entry changes. The previous transect entries are brief. date, start coordinate, end coordinate, depth range, notation of any anomalies. The anomaly field for transects 1 through 5 reads the same each time, NEL. Standard result for open water survey in a sector with no known features of interest. The vessel was doing its job and finding nothing worth noting. Transect 6's anomaly field reads refer T6 annex. The entry after that, transect 7, is missing. The photograph shows the bottom of transect 6's entry, and then a gap in the page sequence, and then what appears to be transect 9. Whether transect 7 and 8 were on a page Hannah couldn't photograph, or whether those pages are missing from the original report, I can't determine from what I have in front of me. The gap could be a photography limitation. It could be a deliberate removal. The document has already shown me one deliberate choice, the 4 retention stamp, and I'm not going to assume the gap is accidental. T6 annex is not in the photographed pages. 17 photographs, and not one of them shows an annex document. Either Hannah couldn't find it in the time she had, or it was kept separately from the main report, which would be consistent with the handwritten instruction I'll get to shortly, or it's gone. I want to record what I know before I go further, because the report is already doing something I recognize from archive material. It creates a gap in exactly the place where the information would be most useful. The gap is either accidental or deliberate, and I have no way to establish which from what I have. What I can establish is this. Transect 6 covers, based on the start and end coordinates in the log, a path that runs directly through the location where 51.4 1.2 DE falls, the Rook coordinate. The survey vessel passed through that location in July 1967, detected something anomalous enough to generate a separate annex document, and the annex was not retained with the report. The exclusion zone on the nautical chart was established in 1968, 1 year after the survey. The next readable section is what appears to be the findings summary. The header is partially cut off at the top of Hannah's photograph. She got 3/4 of the title, enough to confirm it's a summary section, not enough to read the full heading. The text begins mid-paragraph, which means there's a preceding page I don't have. I'm going to note the gap and continue from where the photograph begins. What I can read starts in what feels like the middle of a longer argument. The survey team has already established something in the missing section and is now drawing a conclusion from it. The text opens with a reference to the returns, as though they've already been described elsewhere, which they presumably have on the page I'm missing. The text I have reads, consistent with the hypothesis that the returns were not biological in origin. The metallic signature profile does not match any known wreck in the sector. Cross-referenced against Admiralty Wreck Registry current to 1966, no registration. Cross-referenced against German naval loss records, both world wars, no match. Cross-referenced against Dutch and Belgian commercial loss records, no match. I read that section twice to make sure I have it right before I continue. The sonar returns from Transect 6 were metallic in signature. They were consistent with a large structure of some kind. And the survey team checked every registry they had access to, naval losses, commercial losses, both world wars, and found nothing that matched the location or the return profile. No one knew this thing was there, or someone knew and made sure it wasn't in any registry. The next paragraph. The geometry of the return profile suggests a regular structure of considerable age. Estimated minimum depth of primary mass, 38 meters below seabed surface. Below the seabed surface, not resting on the seabed. Below it. The survey vessel's sonar detected a metallic structure buried under 38 meters of sediment, beneath 50 meters of open water. Whatever it found, it was not a sunken ship. Ships rest on the seabed. They don't end up 38 meters underneath it, unless they've been there long enough for the seabed to accumulate over them, long enough for sedimentation to bury them entirely, which at average North Sea sedimentation rates would take a very long time, centuries, potentially. longer, or unless the structure was never a ship. I keep reading. The summary continues. 3 more paragraphs that are largely procedural. Methodology for verifying the sonar returns. The number of passes made over the location, 4 total, each one confirming the primary mass return. Calibration checks performed on the equipment before and after the survey to rule out instrument error. Consultation with a naval architecture advisor, unnamed, who confirmed the return profile was inconsistent with any recognized vessel class. All of this is the survey team doing its job correctly. Verifying, cross-referencing, ruling out the mundane explanations in sequence. What they're left with after ruling everything out is in the final paragraph of the summary section. I'm going to read it slowly. On the 4th pass, the array registered a secondary return pattern inconsistent with the primary mass. The secondary pattern was rhythmic, interval approximately 11 seconds, duration of observation 23 minutes before the pattern ceased. Nature of secondary pattern undetermined. Rhythmic, not geological, not tidal, not the movement of the vessel itself, which the calibration checks would have accounted for. A rhythmic signal with a consistent 11-second interval emanating from or near a buried metallic structure at the root coordinate, observed for 23 minutes in 1967 and then stopping. I've heard a rhythm before. In the walls of 47 Marginal Road, the hum, which wasn't constant, it had a pace to it, a pulse that accelerated when we were doing the right things and slowed when we weren't. I don't know if 11 seconds is the same interval. I don't know if the two phenomena are related. I'm recording the comparison because it's there, and because I've learned not to dismiss comparisons I can't immediately verify. I put the page down. I pick up the key from my jacket pocket without meaning to. I put it back. The final photograph page is not from the main report. Hannah photographed it separately. It's a different paper stock, slightly smaller, and the top of the image shows it was loose inside the report rather than bound with the other pages. A single sheet. Handwritten, not typed. The handwriting is not Hannah's, and it isn't mine. Most of it is in a shorthand I can't read. Abbreviated notation, symbols I don't recognize, some of which look related to but not identical to the crescent marks, which I'm noting without drawing a conclusion, and numbers without units. The shorthand is dense. Whoever wrote this was writing quickly or writing for themselves, not for a reader. At the bottom of the sheet, the hand changes. The same person, I think, but writing differently, more slowly, more deliberately, pressing harder into the paper, as though they wanted this part to be legible, as though they knew someone else might eventually read it and needed them to understand this part specifically. I'm going to read it directly into the recorder. Archive grid intersection, confirmed at T6 coordinates. Do not annex to main report. Retain separately. Archive grid intersection, confirmed, in a 1967 maritime survey document, written by someone who knew what the grid was, who recognized the T6 coordinate as a grid intersection, and who made a deliberate choice to keep that recognition out of the official record. Not lost, not overlooked, retained separately, on purpose. The survey team filed their report with an anomalous sonar return and a missing annex. Someone, one person, or someone acting on behalf of a group, knew what the anomaly was and made sure that knowledge stayed off the main document. That's not an administrative decision. That's an act of concealment by someone with enough authority to direct what went into the official record and enough knowledge to recognize an archive grid intersection when a sonar array found one 50 meters underwater. In 1967, I don't know who wrote the note. The handwriting doesn't match anything I've handled in the investigation since so far. It could be a crew member. It could be the unnamed naval architecture advisor mentioned in the summary. It could be someone from whatever authority commissioned the survey, someone positioned to receive the findings before they were filed and to instruct the team on what to include and what to separate out. I'm going to photograph this print and send it to Hannah. I want her to see the handwriting before I tell her what it says. I want her reaction to the handwriting itself, independent of the content. I reach for my phone. The survey report print slides off the stack. I turn it over to pick it up. On the back of the loose sheet photograph, the handwritten note, the one I've been reading for the last 10 minutes, the one with the instruction to keep the grid intersection off the main report. There is a symbol, small, drawn in ink, not pencil, placed in the lower right corner of the back of the page as though it was put there deliberately, as though whoever wrote the note on the front knew the back would eventually be turned over. It matches the rook mark on Hannah's grid map exactly.